and gentlemen, welcome to this evening's semi-final debate. My name is Eleanor Tier and I am the chairman of this debate. The timekeeper is Nicola, and this debate will be judged by a panel of 3 adjudicators who are Miss Mules, Miss Lowen and Miss Weir. The topic of this debate is that Centrelink recipients on Newstart and Youth Allowance should be randomly drug tested. The affirmative team seated to my right is from Pembroke, and the negative team seated to my left is from St. Peter's Girls. The speaking time of this debate is 6 minutes. A single warning bell will sound 1 minute before the speaking time, and a double bell will sound at speaking time. Please ensure that your mobile phones are switched off. I declare this debate open and call upon the first affirmative speaker, Annika Turon-Semmens.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that Centrelink recipients on Newstart and Youth Allowance should be randomly drug tested. We, the affirmative team, believe this statement to be true. We would like to define Newstart and Youth Allowance as the main income support payments distributed by Centrelink, the Australian welfare system, to eligible 16 to 67-year-olds, as per the requirements detailed by the Department of Human Services. We define should be randomly drug tested within the context of this debate as to have the obligation to test randomly chosen individuals within areas targeted for higher rates of substance abuse for recreational drugs by bodily fluid method testing. Therefore, we define the topic as that those receiving income support payments via the Australian welfare system should be subject to testing for recreational drug use within the current trial proposed by the Australian Government, as is the current relevance of this topic. Tonight, I will be speaking to you about the benefits of the program, namely that the testing will help identify individuals in need and provide them with the opportunity for rehabilitation through cashless credit cards, and how there is already precedence towards this situation. For example, the drug testing we do on an everyday level and how it benefits society. Our second speaker will be discussing how the money given to welfare recipients should be spent responsibly, and that this money is given to these individuals in order to live a functional lifestyle, not to spend the money wantonly. She also spoke about how the costs of the trial are in no way extravagant and how it will change lives for the better. To begin my first point, drug testing Centrelink recipients on a Newstart and Youth Allowance is a controversial issue, but one that requires due consideration. The introduction of these tests aims to identify and help those who are currently receiving Centrelink payments and are under the influence of drugs. As substance abuse is a problem that affects the whole of our society and not just the individuals abusing the substances, we should be taking measures to prevent and rehabilitate drug-taking individuals. This is where the drug testing program comes in. It aims to randomly test 5,000 people for substance abuse and identify the individuals in need for closer monitoring. Individuals who do test positively will in no way have their payments reduced. Instead, they will be put on a cashless credit card and their purchases more closely monitored in order to ensure that they are not spending taxpayers' money irresponsibly, as our second speaker will elaborate further on. Additional positive tests will put the individual in a rehabilitation program in order to help the person curb their drug-taking habits and reintegrate them into the workforce. Now, while it could be argued that this is all a waste of resources and that it would simply be cheaper to continue welfare payments as we have done previously, we would like to reiterate that this program, while still in the trial stages, aims to rehabilitate citizens so that they can re-enter the workforce and contribute to society once again. For example, the use of the cashless credit card already has proven benefits. ARIMA Research was contracted by the Department of Social Services to undertake an evaluation of the benefits of the cashless credit card introduction within 2 small Australian towns, with reports of high drug use by the National Wastewater Drug Monitoring Program, and found that 66% of individuals under the influence of drug use, 33% reported a reduction in substance use thanks to the card. Furthermore, 31% of trial participants indicated that they had been able to save money and better care for children, and more than 20% of non-participant community members reported that they had noticed a positive difference within their community. This highlights how the introduction of drug testing Centrelink recipients will help us identify individuals in need and place them on a cashless credit card, which has proven benefits and will help people get back on track with their lives. On to my second point. It is already commonplace in our society to test for substance use in drivers and workplaces. So why is it so controversial to test individuals who are receiving taxpayer and government money? Drug testing in the workforce is so common that according to the Society for Human Resource Management, 78% of employers require random mandatory drug testing over the course of their employment. And the Global Drug Survey, in which approximately 6,000 Australians were surveyed, reported that more than 1/3 of full-time workers stated that they had taken drugs or alcohol within 2 hours of starting work. This not only highlights how common drug testing is within the workplace, but also how necessary it is to ensure a safe working environment, as well as to increase productivity and employee morale through the drug testing. Not to mention, 16% of all road fatalities are caused by drug driving, according to a New South Wales report in 2015. And so it is widely accepted that roadside tests are necessary for our safety. If we were to relate this back to the extreme controversy surrounding the issue of drug testing Centrelink recipients, it could almost be called hypocritical in nature when we so readily accept drug testing in other circumstances. It may also be argued that drug testing for road and workplace safety is necessary, and that drug testing Centrelink recipients is not. However, we would like to explain that the introduction of this program is as necessary as road and workplace safety, and that the introduction of these tests will lead to positive effects on communities, as I previously outlined, and that the controversy surrounding the issue is baseless and ignores how much we already employ drug testing capabilities in our society. And this is exactly why drug testing welfare recipients is important and should not at all be controversial. In conclusion, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, while these drug tests are certainly controversial, that is by no means valid grounds to dismiss this valid proposal. Although the idea of drug testing welfare recipients on a Newstart or the Youth Allowance may not be the obvious choice, it certainly is the right one. Thank you.
I now call upon the first negative speaker and Councillor.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and Madam Chairman. The topic for tonight's debate is that Centrelink recipients on the Newstart and Youth Allowance should be randomly drug tested, and we will be arguing the negative side. We agree with the opposing team's definition. I would like to firstly point out a couple of flaws in the opposing team's argument before getting on to my case. The opposition has stated it will help drug takers or users to get their lives together. However, we disagree, as randomly drug testing individuals is not a good or a positive way to provide support towards these individuals. If the results do return as a positive, the process will only take away the means that those people have to support themselves and their family with the support they already have. Tonight, I will be talking about the invasion of privacy and the stigma that random drug tests will cause. Then our second speaker, Asha, will discuss the unlikeliness of drug testing actually having a positive intent and how it will be damaging to our economy. Our third speaker, Ami, will then rebut and sum up our team's case. My first point for tonight is that these random drug tests will be an invasion of privacy. Individuals regard their health information as the most sensitive form of personal information. For this reason, the Privacy Act in 1988 provides extra protections around its handling. For example, an organisation generally needs an individual's consent before they can collect their health information. In addition, All organisations that provide a health service and hold health information other than an employee record are covered by the Privacy Act, whether or not they are small businesses. Information on people's medical and health records is deemed one of the most serious and important factors detailed in the Privacy Act. The current drug testing pilot on Centrelink, Newstart and Youth Allowance recipients appears to be based on entirely subjective criteria and does not take into the account that these individuals have already struggled with a traumatic event, a distressing illness, or a tough juncture in their lives. The very reason that forced them to apply for the allowance in the first instance. Putting these people through random drug testing may inhibit their potential to gain back to a level footing or delay their re-entry into the workforce. There is a fine line between managing Centrelink's payments and invasion of privacy. A line with ethical must not be crossed. Clearly, the random drug testing would be a huge invasion of privacy of these people and thus should not be introduced. My second point demonstrates that recipients of the Newstart and Youth Allowance who are selected for random drug testing will have to deal with the strong stigma attached to being selected. It's been revealed that the trial focuses on recipients on the Newstart and Youth Allowances, meaning young Australians will be overwhelmingly targeted by the trial. This point to the government using a very liberal definition of random testing. The Sydney Morning Herald stated that the test regions will be identified by a data-driven profiling tool developed for the trial to identify relevant characteristics that indicate a higher risk to substance abuse issues. It will not be surprising to hear that the predominance of trials will take place in lower socio-economic areas or target regions with high Aboriginal populations, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. While employees are allowed to institute random drug testing as long as it's laid out in their employment contract, the result of numerous court cases affirm that employees should only be tested in an effort to improve workplace safety, not to weed out those who illicit drugs and are subsequently intoxicated wholly outside of work hours. The plan, which has been widely criticised since it was announced in the May budget, will test Centrelink recipients for illicit substances including ice, ecstasy, marijuana and opioids. And anyone who tests positive will have 80% of their payments quarantined in cashless welfare card. Social Services Minister Christian Porter is unapologetically about catching out one-off users, stating there is no safe or lawful amount of drug intake. This approach is totally unfair, as a number of people who use medical marijuana as prescribed by a medical practitioner. In addition, there will be a category of people who maybe used the drug once, but learned from their mistakes and chose not to take it again. These people may very well be caught up in trial and will be penalised alongside any regular offenders. Introducing the random drug tests will be the equivalent of treating welfare recipients as criminals when these people may have fallen on hard times, no fault of their own reinforces, negative attitudes that all people on welfare would prefer not to work. In conclusion, I have discussed that stigma and the invasion of privacy random drug testing on Newstart and Youth Allowance recipients will agenda. So far, these reasons we as the negative team disagree with this topic. Thank you.
I call upon the second affirmative speaker, Caitlin Lang.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that Centrelink recipients on Newstart and Youth Allowance should be randomly drug tested. And we, as the affirmative team, strongly agree with the statement. Before continuing to argue my team's case, I would first like to point out some flaws in the opposition's arguments. The opposition has said that the places that the drug test will target will be biased, and however, this is only in the trial. This is only in the trial stage right now, and the areas that are being tested can later be expanded as well. The places that they're testing now need the trial the most, and they will be monitored the most closely, as they have higher rate of drugs, meaning that there are more people that could receive help from rehabilitation or the use of cashless credit cards, as our first speaker, Annika, has already said, will benefit the community. They have also said that it is an invasion of privacy. Centrelink recipients already have to give many personal details to Centrelink in order to receive payments. It is fair to say that Centrelink may know more about individuals than themselves. In order to receive payments, individuals must provide thus claiming it will be an invasion of privacy is incorrect, as they already provide info about themselves, every aspect of their lives, and drug testing will not, and it will barely make a difference to this. The first negative speaker has also said that randomly drug testing and people who are found positive, it will take away their means to support themselves. As our first speaker, Annika, has already said, if the test returns positive, they will be put onto a rehabilitation program and they will get cashless credit cards. This by no means takes away their way to support themselves. They can still use the money, however, it will just be on a cash. They will not be able to withdraw cash, meaning that they cannot use this cash to buy drugs. This is why the program is a positive one, and it will not disadvantage the already disadvantaged. To recap our team's case so far, our first speaker, Annika, has already spoken about the benefits of installing this program will have, mainly identifying individuals in need and aiding their rehabilitation. She also spoke about how drug testing is already present in society and the positive effects that it currently has on our society. Our second speaker today, I will be speaking on how it is the taxpayers' money that has been given to welfare recipients and that it should be used wisely. I will also speak about how drug testing Centrelink recipients is a valuable use of our resources which we should be willing to spend. Now to my first point, that the money being given to the recipients of Centrelink comes from taxpayers, and it is imperative that this money be used correctly for the benefit of society. Money earned by the taxpayers and distributed by the government is money that should be spent wisely, as to ensure the trust of the public and reassure them that their tax is going toward a worthy cause. If we are to recklessly give away this money to welfare recipients without monitoring how it is spent, then we are not at all being responsible with the hard-earned money of working citizens. This can be further highlighted by an exclusive interview with the Courier Mail, when Treasurer Scott Morrison stated that nearly 90% of personal income tax paid by Australians is used to fund the nation's booming annual $155 billion welfare bill. This is a concerning statistic when we think about how we monitor where all this money goes. Welfare recipients are being provided for by Australia's working class by their hard-earned money, and in order to help get people back on their feet. However, for every good intention, there will always be drawbacks, and not all of these individuals will spend this money wisely. Furthermore, welfare should be something that is not taken for granted. Currently, according to the Human Rights Act, welfare is not a right, but a privilege provided to us by the government. A privilege that allows financially struggling Australians to maintain a functional lifestyle. Starting these drug tests will allow us to identify those who are spending money irresponsibly and in no way reduce, but instead closer manage their finances so this money can be spent in the most effective way. This is exactly why Centrelink recipients on Newstart and Youth Allowance should be drug tested. Now to my second point. That drug testing Centrelink recipients is a valuable use of our resources, contrary to what many may argue. To begin with, we'd like to consider a few of the government's recent projects that have spent exorbitant amounts of money on something infrastructure that could be considered useless. One of these example is the O-Bahn, City Access Project. According to the state government, this is a $160 million project to move the O-Bahn station closer to the city, resulting in 7 minutes less time to commute. That's $160 million to save but 7 minutes. In comparison, drug testing Centrelink recipients is a lot cheaper. According to the Australian newspaper, it costs about $20 per person. So for the trial of 5,000 people, that's only $100,000. And this has a much more significant impact than saving just 7 minutes. In fact, the cost of the O-Bahn could pay for the whole scheme 1,600 times over. Although these examples are not in direct correlation, it highlights how willing the government is to spend money on useless infrastructure instead of helping people in need. To conclude, knowing that $155 billion goes into welfare, we should be closely monitoring how this money is spent, and it should be used correctly. Not only this, but we are forgetting how little drug testing actually costs, and we should be willing to spend this money on the drug test, as it is not a large amount. Thank you.
I call upon the second negative speaker, Asha Short.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that Centrelink recipients on Newstart and Youth Allowance should be randomly drug tested, and we, being the negative team, strongly disagree with this idea. Before I proceed to my arguments, I'd like to point out some inherent flaws made by the opposition. The first speaker said that testing will provide for treatment for those in need. However, that is not to say that these individuals will be encouraged by these methods. Get Up campaign's director, Natalie O'Brien, said that this could stop people getting treatment and put lives at risk. She said that cutting off more income support payments creates a barrier to treatment for people suffering with drug and alcohol problems. Doctors, nurses, and allied health professionals all agree. All clinical evidence tells us that you cannot punish people struggling with drug and alcohol problems into recovery. Tonight, as the second speaker, I'm going to focus on the unlikeliness of such a process fulfilling a supposed positive intent, and how, instead, it will prove to be damaging economically. Now to my first point. In applying this process, the focus would be to alter the behaviour of drug takers in a way that benefits our society. However, realistically, its implementation would provide no positive, drastic change. This idea is simply and unquestionably a punitive approach to specific demographics. Target individuals, determine whether or not they have taken drugs, and, if returned positive, take away the only means they have to support themselves and potentially their families. Those with serious drug problems, in a way that is actually affecting our society, will not be encouraged by this method. Why? Because addiction cannot be treated through fear. Dr. Alex Wodak, the president of the Australia Drug Law Reform Foundation, stated that this method would simply see drug users shifting their consumption habits to different drugs, possibly ones that will be more damaging in the long run. This is then reinforced by Associate Professor of the University of Melbourne, John Fitzgerald, who stated that these tests have a bad record of serious unintended consequences. People switch to drugs not being tested for, and people will realise that smoking cannabis has a long half-life for showing up on tests, and switch from cannabis, which has fewer problems, to synthetic cannabis or more serious drugs. In introducing this policy, these people will simply alter their behaviours in order to remain uncaught, because why take a harder route that results in punishment when they can continue their lives unchanged with a comfortable income? Now, not only will this process be ineffective, but the impact of it can be very detrimental on our society. Professor Fitzgerald also stated that for those who do test positive and receive sanctions that result in reduced access to living money, these people will still need a living income. This will open the window to engage in other types of crime in order to make money. Shadow Attorney General Mark Dreyfus also emphasised that there is no evidence that these tests will lead to a reduction in drug use. He too says that, on the contrary, it is likely to lead to an increase in crime. When you take away people's only means of living, you force them to compensate, and they will turn to the easiest path, one that concerns crime, and the exact opposite of what implementing this type of program attempts to achieve. There will undoubtedly be more negative consequences in this than positive ones. In direct connection to my first point, this idea is economically disadvantageous, and there are far better ways of applying more progressive methods to achieve the same intended outcomes. As I have already emphasised in my first point, treatment through fear is ineffective and impractical. However, to spend money on it is even more ludicrous. In order to encourage people who take drugs, seek help and progress, adequate and attractive treatment is a key factor that must be taken into account. Dr. Nadine Izard, the Clinical Director for Alcohol and Drug Services in Sydney, stated that because we're looking at a situation that has been developed without any evidence that it will work for what it's supposed to do, it is very expensive. For example, in New Zealand back in 2015, they spent around $1 million on testing just over 8,000 people, and only 22 people tested positive. The money used in implementing this instead should be directed towards enforcing methods that will actually provide resources for a more practical and effective recovery, which will ultimately benefit drug rates in our society. Dr. Alex Wodak emphasised that the treatment options being forced on individuals who are targeted from these random drug tests are not effective, and if the government wants to help, give more money to treatment. These are tiny amounts of money. Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, in order to gain a real benefit for our society, we need to look at the most practical, efficient, and beneficial methods. Random drug tests are not going to achieve this, and for a method that will be demanding economically and will contribute to further predicaments, there are far better options available. And therefore, Centrelink recipients on Newstart and Youth Allowance should not be randomly drug tested. Thank you.
I call upon the third affirmative speaker, Tori Shakes.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of tonight's debate is that Centrelink recipients on Newstart and Youth Allowance should be randomly drug tested. We at the affirmative team strongly believe that this statement to be true. As third affirmative speaker, I will be pointing out the flaws in the opposition's arguments and then summing up my team's case. The first negative speaker has said that drug testing is inhumane and dehumanizes people. What would be inhumane is if we were to take away the welfare payments completely, abandon any and all forms of social netting, and leave people financially challenged to fend for themselves. That would be against our morality. What isn't humane, however, is the responsible and well thought out drug testing program that will only affect those who test positive, and as our first speaker stated, those who test positive will in no way have their payments reduced, but instead will simply be more closely monitored to ensure government money is being spent responsibly. This is far from inhumane and not only offers people who test positive the chance to regain control over their finances, but also the opportunity to enter rehabilitation programs. This is why we believe that drug testing welfare recipients is not only humane, but the right decision to make. The first negative speaker has also tried to tell you that drug testing is morally wrong and an invasion of people's privacy. Although the idea of closely monitoring a recipient who tests positive may be considered an invasion of privacy to some, we would like to reiterate just how closely monitored a welfare recipient's life already is, regardless if they have tested positive or not. The Centrelink website details that welfare recipients are monitored periodically to ensure that you are meeting several residential rules. You must prove that you are looking for and motivated to find a job, and their medical details are checked regularly. Also, if you are not looking for a full-time job, then it is ensured that you are either studying full-time or have a full-time Australian apprentice, or are independent or need to live away from home in order to study. These recipients must provide in every detail, every aspect of their life, what they intend to do about them and how they manage their finances to the government already. Yet there is still hypocritical controversy claiming that those monitoring of these people's lives is an invasion of people's privacy. The first negative speaker also spoke to you about medical marijuana. The drug test requires several tests in order to put the individuals into the rehabilitation program, and if an individual has a legitimate reason for these medical drugs, such as doctor approval, it is fair to say that they will not be penalised. First negative speaker also argued that it is biased against young people. The Newstart and Youth Allowance combined target anyone from the ages of 16 to 67. So unless 76 years old is considered young in context to a 20-year-old, then we believe that the other team has argued incorrectly. The second speaker from the negative team has tried to tell you that this form of drug testing will not do anything to educate the people of the risks of the abuse. However, this is false. Educating people is what the drug testing aims to do. It aims to identify people with drug addictions so that their rehabilitation can be monitored and encouraged. Therefore, drug testing will be useful in the overall goal to foster rehabilitation and drug education amongst those affected. The second negative speaker also stated that it would take away money to support the family. However, this is false, as our first speaker, Annika, has already spoken to you tonight. If someone is tested positive in these drug tests, then it does not reduce the amount of money that they get for their basic human resources. It merely reduces the amount of cash that they can take out. So it would stop them from buying things such as drugs. Therefore, it is increasing a better family life for them and improving the lives of not only them, but those around them. The second speaker has also said that the drug checks didn't work in New Zealand. And yes, drug testing has not previously worked in places such as New Zealand. However, just because something didn't work in one place does not mean that it will fail in another. According to the Study Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, Australian welfare is much more efficient than any other advanced country. It was found in a study that a family of 4 dependent on welfare received almost half the median household income in Australia, compared to in other countries such as the US, where they only receive 20%. Yet much less money is spent on welfare by the Australian government. The second speaker also said that drug habits will be shifted to less drugs. While this is a valid argument, other than a few claims, there is very little statistical evidence to prove that this will indeed happen. Again, what we would like to reiterate is that this is a trial and it's trial to against. Okay. I will now sum up my team's case. Our first speaker, Annika, had 2 points tonight. Her first point was about the drug testing of Centrelink recipients how it aims to help society. She also spoke about how it is already a commonplace to substance test drivers and people in the workplace, so it should not be controversial. Our second speaker, Caitlin, spoke. First point was about how welfare is a privilege and not a right. Her second point was that this system of random drug testing is actually a very efficient use of resources in comparison to other government projects such as the OBOM. So in conclusion, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we the Affirmatives team strongly believe that the Centrelink recipients on Newstart and Youth Allowance should be randomly drug tested, as it would benefit both the individuals on the programme and the taxpayers. Thank you.
I call upon the third negative speaker, Army Yognik.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. As the negative team, we strongly believe that testing Centrelink recipients on Newstart and Youth Allowance programs would be wrong. Before I summarise my team's case, I will correct some of the flaws in the opposition's case. I will separate their misleading points thematically. The opposition started by speaking about the social aspects. The first speaker of the affirmative team stated that it will help drug users prevent further use and encourage rehabilitation. However, this is wrong, as randomly drug testing individuals will in no way provide support for individuals. If the results are returned positive, the process will only take away the means that those people have to support themselves and potentially their families. Mark Dreyfus, Shadow Attorney General, says there is no evidence that the tests will lead to a reduction in drug use. It's likely to lead to an increase in crime, an increase in inequality, and further harsh treatment of welfare recipients, he told the ABC radio. The first speaker of the opposition also stated that drug testing is very common in the workplace and whilst driving. However, this is very different to randomly drug testing Centrelink recipients. Testing at work or whilst driving is purely for safety and health reasons. Drug testing recipients of Centrelink would not have the same benefits that testing those that are at work or driving would have. This testing takes into account what people do outside the workplace. Therefore, people can suffer extremely damaging consequences when their behaviour doesn't even impair work or compromise safety. The second speaker of the affirmative team spoke of the economic aspects and tried to tell you that the costs of drug testing would not be extravagant and is a valuable use of our resources. However, this is incorrect, as drug testing itself would be very expensive and would not be a good use of public or government funds. In New Zealand, a similar experience was trialled, where they attempted to drug test people receiving government funds. However, they ended up spending around $1 million on testing just over 8,000 people, but only 22 people tested positive. This is less than 0.3% of the people tested. Is $1 million for 0.3% of people tested really worth it? Clearly, the money that is spent on conducting the research and tests exceeds the money saved. The second speaker of the affirmative team stated that the money paid by taxpayers should be used well. However, drug testing is not a good way to use this money. Instead, we should focus on helping our social isolation problem. Drug testing will humiliate and shame individuals, but it will not stop them from taking drugs. People that are addicted will find ways to go underground and work around the law, which is why drug testing would not work. In 2001, in Portugal decided to decriminalise the use of all drugs, instead deciding to treat possession and use of drugs as a public health issue, not a criminal one. The results of this were outstanding, with drug-related HIV infections decreasing by over 90% since 2001, according to the drug policy think tank Transform. Drug-related deaths in Portugal are the second lowest in the whole of the European Union. Just 3 in a million people die of overdoses there, compared to with the European Union average of 20 people per million. And the number of people in drug treatment has increased by 60%. These results clearly show that a war on drugs is not the right solution, and instead we should focus on helping our citizens to live healthier and happier lives. The second speaker said that they will still receive cashless credit cards. However, this is still extremely disadvantageous to those individuals. According to news.com.au, recipients can lose up to 80% of the payments they currently spend, leaving them with just $53 of cash, and the rest placed on a quarantined card for minimal essentials. The third speaker of the affirmative team stated that we said it dehumanises people. However, we never said this. Instead, we believe that it will shame those and cause a detrimental effect on our society. It concerns stigma as a result of the tests, not dehumanisation from them. The third speaker of the affirmative team tried to tell you that recipients' lives would already be monitored. However, the information or data collected would be confidential. Drug testing would be a very public aspect. The result of drug testing would be that of shame and public humiliation, which would clearly not be an effective solution. I will now summarise my team's case. Our first speaker, Ankita, spoke about how random drug testing the Centrelink recipients on Newstart and Youth Allowance would be a complete invasion of privacy, as individuals regard their health as the most sensitive form of personal information, which is why the Privacy Act 1988 provides extra protection around its handling. Ankita then went on to speak about how the recipients would have to deal with the strong negative stigma that is attached to being selected, and how the approach of randomly drug testing individuals would be unfair, as a number of people take medical marijuana. Our second speaker, Asha, focused on the unlikeliness of drug testing actually having a positive intent, and how, instead, it will be damaging to our society, as well as our economy. Asha also spoke about how the effect of this implementation would be detrimental to our society, as it would take away some people's only means of living. So, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we, the negative team, know that randomly drug testing Centrelink recipients on Newstart and Youth Allowance would be wrong, as it is an invasion of privacy, it creates a negative stigma, and has a detrimental effect on our society. Thank you.